New York City had always moved like a symphony, fast, unpredictable, bursting with crescendos. But that morning, the rain slowed everything down. Thick gray clouds hung like heavy thoughts above the skyline, pressing against the windows of a penthouse where the silence inside was louder than the storm outside. Water streaked down the glass like tears no one dared to cry. Inside that silence sat Ila Moreau, 21, once called the soul of the keys by critics across the world. Her hands, the same ones that once danced across grand pianos with the grace of falling snow, now rested motionless in her lap. Her wheelchair faced the window, but her eyes were far away, locked behind a veil no one had been able to lift since the crash. She hadn't spoken in weeks, not to the nurses, not to her father, not even to herself. The last sound she remembered clearly was the final note she played at Lincoln Center, a haunting, perfect E flat that had echoed through the hall like a whispered prayer. Then the lights, the applause, the flash of her smile, and then the screech. Metal tearing through silence, her mother's scream, the car flipping, a blinding rainstorm, and a second later, nothing. When she woke up, the world was no longer hers. Her legs, once so sure beneath a concert gown, were useless, her future a blur. Her gift, locked behind fear, pain, and bone-deep despair. Marcus Moreau stood behind her now, not as a father, but as a titan unraveling. Founder of Moreau Technologies, he built empires from code, tamed markets with cold precision, and made headlines as the man who never lost. But all the power, all the money, all the brilliance couldn't fix his daughter. Not this time. He had flown in surgeons from Germany, therapists from Switzerland, even a neurospecialist rumored to operate in war zones. But Ila remained untouched, unmoved, untouched, except by the soft clink of her spoon against the untouched tea beside her. She refused food most days, refused to speak. Her gaze rarely blinked. She was alive, but only barely. Marcus had never believed in failure. It simply wasn't permitted in his world. So when his daughter slipped out of reach, his response wasn't tenderness. It was strategy, structure, control. He converted an entire wing of their penthouse into a rehabilitation suite. He demanded daily updates. He measured progress like stock charts. Growing angrier each day, they remained flat. But inside, something was unraveling in him too. He watched her now, still staring out at the rain, and for the first time, he whispered something he hadn't admitted even to himself. I can't fix this. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even meant for her. But her head turned, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. Not a response, more like a twitch of memory, of once being a daughter who could be moved by her father's voice. It broke him. That night, he stood in the cold glow of the kitchen, holding a glass of scotch he hadn't tasted. His assistant's voice buzzed in his earpiece. There's a place, she said. Upstate. It's different. They don't use machines. It's called Willow Ridge. He said nothing for a long time. Book it, he finally muttered. Maybe she doesn't need a doctor. Maybe she needs silence to be heard. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that it wasn't hope driving him anymore. It was escape. He needed to escape her silence before it swallowed him whole. The first thing Ila noticed was the absence of noise. New York had always been loud. Even the silence between traffic lights buzzed with electricity. But here, in the back of the black SUV winding its way through the Catskill Mountains, the world had grown still, not quiet like a hospital room, quiet like something sacred, like the earth was holding its breath. Towering trees lined the road like sentinels, mist coiling around their trunks. Fog clung low to the forest floor, soft and silver, as if nature itself didn't want to startle her. She didn't ask where they were. She didn't care. She'd stopped caring somewhere between her 6th physical therapist and her father's 1000th. Promise, her body, once fire and music and freedom, now felt like a coffin she carried. Her father sat beside her, checking his smartwatch every few minutes. Lips pressed thin in that way that meant he was calculating something: time, money, maybe the distance between what she'd been and what she was now. We're here, he said finally as the car pulled through an unmarked gate. Willow Ridge wasn't a hospital, not in the way she expected. It looked like something out of a forgotten novel: wooden cabins scattered among pines, smoke curling from stone chimneys, a crystal lake glimmering beyond a grove of bare-limbed oaks. The main building resembled a giant lodge, its porch wrapped in thick ivy and carved beams. No ambulances, no cold tiles, just the wind and the creak of old wood. A woman approached the car, tall, strong-shouldered, with weathered eyes and long gray braids. "Welcome to Willow Ridge," she said simply. "I'm Dr. Kira Hall." "She's not verbal," Marcus said quickly, too quickly. "We've tried. We don't push here," Dr. Hall interrupted. "We wait. Healing has its own clock." Ila stared at her, something strange flickering behind her eyes. This woman hadn't spoken to her like a child, like a project. She didn't ask her how she was feeling. She didn't look at her legs. She just saw her, or tried to. They rolled her to a cabin near the tree line, small, quiet, with large windows and a single bed. No machines, no schedules taped to the door, no smell of bleach, only the scent of pine, lavender, and something older. A basket of hand-knit blankets sat at the foot of the bed. Someone had cared enough to choose them. Later that evening, Marcus stood in the doorway, suitcase in hand. He looked older than she remembered. "I'll be back on Sunday," he said. His voice cracked. "Don't hate this place before you try it." She didn't reply, just turned her head to the window. The door shut behind him. That night, she couldn't sleep. The air here wasn't like the city. It was heavier, colder, wild. She watched the trees sway under moonlight, their limbs reaching like dancers frozen mid-movement. And then a sound, soft, distant, beautiful. Music. A gentle melody drifting on the wind. Not from speakers, not from a phone. Real. She pulled herself into the wheelchair and rolled to the porch. The night air bit her skin, but she barely noticed. Across the clearing, in a glass-paneled greenhouse glowing faintly in the dark, a figure moved. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, his hands dirtied with soil. Beside him danced a small child, barefoot and laughing, spinning between rows of potted herbs and hanging lights. Ila stared, heart beating in a way it hadn't in months. The man moved with strange grace, like someone who'd carried heavy things his whole life but learned not to break under the weight. And just as he turned toward her, his eyes lifted. He saw her. He smiled, not a pity smile, not polite. Something else. Warm. Gentle. Human. She blinked. And in that tiny moment, in the stillness of that frozen breath, a thought she hadn't dared to have since the crash rose like a whisper in her mind. Maybe not everyone sees me as broken, but hope, she reminded herself sharply, was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment, and disappointment had teeth. She rolled back inside and shut the door, but the music stayed with her, drifting into the shadows of her sleep like a promise she didn't want to believe. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Still, that smile, it haunted her. And somewhere deep in the woods, under a sky trembling with stars, a single dad tucked his son into bed, not knowing that the girl watching from the dark was about to change everything for both of them. The morning came slow, wrapped in a fog so thick it swallowed the tops of the pines. Dew clung to the glass of Ila's cabin window, each droplet catching light like tiny prison bars. She hadn't moved in hours. Her wheelchair sat beside the bed, untouched, the blankets still creased from a night of twisting in a sleep that never truly arrived. But the music from last night hadn't left her mind, soft and haunting, like memory walking barefoot across a cold wooden floor. It had burrowed deep, deeper than any therapy session, deeper than any well-meaning nurse's words. It made her feel something she wasn't ready to name. She hadn't told anyone. Not that there was anyone to tell. The staff left her alone, more respectful than distant, as though Willow Ridge itself had rules about forcing broken things to perform. Still, silence hurt just as badly as pity. Mid-morning, a soft knock came at her cabin door. She didn't answer, not because she didn't hear it but because she didn't trust it. Kindness was usually the first step toward manipulation. She'd learned that after the accident, people rushed to be near her pain, but not because they could carry it. They just didn't want to look away. After a long pause, the door creaked open, not from insistence, but from an innocence too young to fear rejection. "Hi," came a voice, small, curious, entirely unafraid. She turned, surprised, a little. Voice stood in the doorway, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Brown hair, wild with cowlicks. Freckles splattered across his cheeks like spilled sugar. He didn't stare at her legs. He didn't flinch at the sight of the chair. He simply smiled, wide and crooked. "You're new," he said. She didn't answer. "That's okay. I don't talk much when I'm sad either." Her throat tightened. Something about the way he said it, like he hadn't read it from a card or heard it from a counselor. Like he knew. "My name's Leo. My dad works with the plants here. He says plants don't rush, and people shouldn't either." Ela blinked. "He's really smart," Leo added. "Matter of fact, he helped me when my mom went to heaven." The word hit like a tuning fork against her chest. He didn't cry. He just said it, like the sky was blue or the trees were tall. And suddenly she felt like she was in the presence of someone who'd walked through something deeper. Then she'd realized. Leo stepped closer. "My dad said there's a girl here who's really sad. Is that you?" She didn't know what to say. Her voice was dust. He didn't wait for her to answer. He said sometimes sad people just need a different kind of help. Not the doctor kind, the listening kind. He pointed through the fog, past the trail, to the glowing greenhouse at the edge of the clearing. "He's there right now. Maybe you could watch him, or talk, or not talk. He's okay with not talking." Then, as simply as he had arrived, Leo turned and skipped down the steps, disappearing into the mist like a dream that had spoken. Ela didn't follow. Not right away. She wheeled herself to the porch, heart pounding for reasons she couldn't define. She sat there in the cool, sharp air, staring at the distant shape of the greenhouse through the trees. "In our past, maybe too." Then she moved, not toward the greenhouse, not yet, but toward the music. Inside her cabin, she opened the drawer where she kept the sketchbook no one knew about. Her fingers were slow, unsure. She hadn't drawn since the crash, but as her pencil moved, the image formed on its own. A boy with freckles. A man in a navy t-shirt. A greenhouse glowing in the night. And in the corner of the page, almost hidden, a wheelchair in silhouette. She didn't know why she drew it. Only that something in her had begun to shift. She didn't believe in miracles. Not anymore. But something inside her whispered, maybe this time, it's not about believing. Maybe it's about letting someone believe for you. And for the first time since the accident, Ela didn't feel entirely alone. She didn't feel whole, but she didn't feel empty either. That night, as the stars blinked above the dark treetops, she left her porch door open just an inch, just in case the music came back. The storm rolled in without warning, fast, sharp, and full of teeth. Thunder cracked over the mountains like bones snapping under weight, and the rain fell hard, relentless, drumming on the cabin roof like angry fingers. It was the kind of storm that stirred memories from their graves, yanked loose emotions from the places you thought you'd buried them forever. Ela didn't sleep. She sat near the window, knees covered by a wool blanket, watching lightning carve open the sky in crooked lines. Every flash lit the greenhouse in the distance, its glass walls shimmering like the surface of water, fragile and luminous. Through the glare and the dark, she could barely make out a figure moving inside. Him. She didn't know his name yet, but she recognized the way he moved. Slow, deliberate, like someone who had learned to carry invisible things heavier than grief, heavier than loss. And every time the storm lit up the glass, he was still there, working, watering, adjusting a pot, tending to life. Ela clenched the sketchbook in her lap. She hadn't shown it to anyone, not her father, not the nurses, but it had become her only voice, her only way of saying I exist. Every page carried a piece of what she couldn't speak aloud. And lately, more and more of those pages had begun to look like that man, that greenhouse, that boy with the wild hair. She told herself it was nothing, just lines and shadows. But something had begun to waken her, not hope, not yet, but suspicion. Suspicion that maybe, just maybe, this place wasn't built to fix people. Maybe it was built to remind them they weren't broken. And that thought scared her more than anything, because if she wasn't broken, then she had to decide who she was now. The next morning, the rain softened to mist. The world outside glistened, leaves dripping silver, moss glowing green beneath it all. She didn't realize how long she had been staring until a knock echoed through the door again. Only this time, it wasn't the boy. It was him, the man. From the greenhouse. He stood there quietly, soaked from the storm, holding something wrapped in cloth. His shirt clung to his chest, and mud streaked his jeans. But his expression was calm, like the rain had never touched him. She tensed. He noticed. He knelt slowly, deliberately so he wouldn't tower over her. "I'm Eli," he said. No clipboard, no pity in his voice, just a name, offered like a hand. She said nothing. "Leo told me he met you," he continued, glancing down at the cloth in his hands. "He doesn't usually talk to strangers, must have felt something." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a small clay pot. Inside was a single flower, yellow, fragile, its petals bruised but alive. "This one nearly drowned in the storm last night," he said, "but I found it just in time." He held it out to her. "You don't have to smile or say anything, but maybe this will make today 1% better." She stared at the flower, not because it was beautiful, but because it was real. He didn't wait for a thank you, didn't linger. He just set it on the windowsill beside her and left. Ela sat frozen, staring at the door long after he was gone. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from something deeper, something like recognition. People had given her flowers before, bouquets sent by orchestras, fans, hospitals, even strangers. But no one had ever brought her this in nearly. Ruined bloom, saved from the storm, offered without explanation or expectation, as if it understood what it meant to almost be lost. Hours passed. The light changed. The flower didn't move, but it seemed to lean toward her. She opened her sketchbook. This time, she didn't draw Eli. She drew the flower, and below it, a single sentence in small, uneven letters. "I don't know if I can bloom again, but maybe it's okay to be planted somewhere new." The next morning, she wheeled herself to the greenhouse. She didn't know why. She just knew she couldn't sit in the silence anymore. The door was open. Music played softly, an old record crackling in the corner. Something gentle and wordless. Eli was there, replanting herbs. He looked up, startled but not surprised. She didn't say anything, just rolled inside. He didn't ask her to explain. He just slid a small pot across the table. "You can help me with this one," he said. She picked up the trowel, and for the first time in months, her hands remembered how to move. The sky burned gold that morning, a rare kind of light that filtered through the mist like something sacred had been stirred awake. Dew glistened on every leaf, every blade of grass, as if the world had been freshly painted just for her. But inside the greenhouse, Ela wasn't looking at the sky. She was watching her own hands. They moved slowly, clumsily, but they moved. Eli said nothing as she filled the pot with soil. Not a single word of praise, just silence, respectful, steady, like he knew if he said too much, it would scare her back into her shell. And maybe he was right, because even now, as she touched the dirt with trembling fingers, part of her kept waiting for the collapse, for the inevitable moment when this tiny, blooming hope would be snatched away. Eli stood a few feet away, trimming leaves from an overgrown mint plant. He didn't watch her, but she could feel his presence like gravity, solid, unmoving. "Why do you do this?" she asked suddenly, her voice raw, cracked, like the sound of a piano string breaking after months of tension. He didn't look up. "Do what?" "This," she said, gesturing at the greenhouse, the plants, the quiet way he just existed near her. "You're not a doctor. You're not even on staff, are you?" He set down his shears. The mint leaves fluttered to the floor, like secrets. "No," he said simply, "not anymore." A beat of silence passed. "I was once," he added, "in another life, worked with trauma patients, the ones who forgot how to breathe. So why leave?" He turned then, his eyes darker than she expected, not hard, just heavy. "Because one day, someone I loved forgot how to breathe. And I didn't see it coming." She didn't ask for more. She didn't need to. She recognized the kind of silence he was carrying, the kind that held pictures. "You never wanted to frame Leo's mom?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Outside, a breeze rustled the branches. She was sunshine," he said, voice low, laughing in places no one else found funny. But the shadows crept in slow. By the time I noticed, she'd already decided the world didn't have space for her pain. Ela felt her chest tighten. Her fingers clenched around the pot. "And now you try to save other broken people," she said bitterly. He walked toward her, kneeling beside the bench. "I don't think people break," he said. "I think they bruise, and sometimes the bruises run deep enough to make you forget who you were before." She looked at him then, really looked. His hands were calloused, but gentle. His eyes weren't offering pity. They were offering place. Place to grieve, place to feel, place to simply be. She didn't cry, not yet, but something inside her cracked like ice underfoot. "You want to know what I remember most about before the accident?" she whispered. He didn't speak. The feeling of being alive on stage, of every note having weight, purpose, and now she stared down at her legs. "I don't feel anything, not even the absence, just numb." Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, metal, rusted. He placed it in her palm. A music box key. This was hers, he said, the last thing she touched before she left. Ela stared at it, unsure. "I found it in our attic months after," he continued. "And when I opened the box, it didn't work. Not at first. The spring had locked. Too much time, too much silence." He looked her straight in the eyes. "But it wasn't broken, just waiting for the right hand to turn the key." Her breath caught. That night, back in her cabin, she didn't sleep again. Instead, she stared at the key until morning, and when the first light spilled over the mountaintops, she reached under her bed and pulled out her travel piano, the one they'd brought from New York, the one she'd refused to touch. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant. Then one note, a low, uncertain C, then another. And then her hands remembered. It wasn't a song, not yet, just fragments. But the sound filled the cabin like fire in a winter house. Outside, hidden in the trees, Eli stood beside Leo, listening. The boy grinned. "She's playing," he whispered. Eli smiled, but his eyes were full. "No," he said, "she's breathing." The days that followed weren't magical. They weren't filled with triumphant breakthroughs or cinematic progress. They were messy, frustrating, quiet, and yet something had shifted. Ela no longer woke up dreading the light that seeped through the wooden slats of her cabin window. She didn't wheel herself toward the porch with bitterness or drag her fingers across the worn keys of her travel piano like she was punishing them. Now, there were mornings she reached for the sketchbook before she even realized her hand was moving. Some days she played 2 notes, other days 10. Once, she played a broken version of Claire de Lune until her hands cramped, and tears spilled down her cheeks without permission. But she kept playing, she kept trying, and for the first time since the crash, she wanted to. Eli never hovered. He didn't ask for updates. He didn't mark her progress with charts or clinical notes. Instead, he built her a space behind the greenhouse and old, half-collapsed garden shed that he transformed piece by piece. It became a hybrid of everything she'd once loved, a music nook with soft lighting and warm wood, lined with potted lavender and rosemary, mirrors salvaged from a shuttered ballet studio, and a piano bench she could transfer to from her chair. "Without help, I call it the Echo Room," he said one morning as she wheeled through its door, stunned, because it reminds you of what's still inside, even if it's buried deep. It was the first time in months Ela cried in front of someone, and he didn't look away. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of bruised orange and lilac, Marcus Moreau arrived unexpectedly. His helicopter landed on the helipad carved near the lake. His polished shoes stepped onto damp earth as if the world itself should yield to him. He hadn't seen Ela in over a month. He'd kept his distance, sending assistants for updates, forwarding medical invoices, forwarding therapists' credentials she never read. He walked into the main lodge, where Dr. Hall met him with folded arms. "Where is she?" he asked. "Busy," she replied. "With what?" "Sitting, healing," she said, unfazed by his tone. "Something money hasn't been able to buy." Her, he narrowed his eyes. "This place has cost me nearly—" "No," she interrupted. "It's cost her." He found Ela alone in the Echo Room, playing. Not performance, not perfection, just raw, broken music that somehow made the air taste like truth. She didn't hear him at first. Her eyes were closed. When she finally saw him standing in the doorway, she froze. You shouldn't have come, she said flatly. I wanted to see how you were, he replied. She gestured to the room with her eyes. This is how I am, broken mirrors and all. He stepped inside. Something about him looked older, thinner, around the eyes. You're improving, he said, like it surprised him. She didn't nod. Not because of you. The words were like glass. I know, he said after a moment. She turned back to the piano. Why now? She asked. Because I thought if I threw enough money at it, if I surrounded you with specialists and the best equipment, something would crack open. But I think I was afraid of seeing you like this. Human, hurting. She didn't respond. Not right away. Then, quietly, I needed a father, not a project manager. His shoulders slumped. For a man who built empires, the weight of those words bent him more than any market crash. I don't know how to fix that, he admitted. Behind them, the door creaked. Eli stepped in, carrying a pot of fresh soil. He froze when he saw Marcus. The two men looked at each other, one a titan of industry, the other a quiet builder of broken things. Marcus's voice was low. What makes you think you can fix her? Eli met his gaze without flinching. I don't, he said. I just see her, and I stay. That night, Ela wheeled herself outside. Under a sky so clear the stars felt close enough to touch. She sat by the fire pit where Leo roasted marshmallows with a nurse and told knock-knock jokes that made no sense. Eli joined her without speaking. After a while, she whispered, You weren't scared of my father. Not scared of men who measure life in numbers, he said. I've seen what they miss. He's not cruel, she said, just distant, like he's afraid to sit still. Stillness makes some people hear things they don't want to hear. She looked down at her legs. Sometimes I think my body stopped listening to me because I stopped speaking to it. Eli picked up a handful of pine needles, crushed them between his fingers, releasing their scent. Then maybe it's time to speak differently. The next morning, they tried something new. He brought her to a platform near the lake, where the old wooden boards creaked with each breeze. We're not walking today, he said. We're remembering. He hung sheer curtains around them, like ghostly ballet studio walls, mirrors. On one side, her piano on the other. And then he said something that struck her to her core. I think your body's waiting on your heart, and your heart's waiting on permission. She stared at him. Permission for what? To believe. Again. And as the morning wind moved through the curtains like whispers from another life, she nodded. One small, trembling nod. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the anger, beneath the grief, beneath the numbness, something whispered back. Yes. The wind rose that morning like a warning. Not loud, not violent, just different. Sharper, colder. Like the world had shifted slightly off balance. The sky was gray, but not with rain. It was the kind of gray that made the birds go quiet and the trees stand still. Listening. In the echo room, Ela sat staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She wasn't practicing. Her hands rested in her lap. The piano was untouched. The air smelled like rosemary and old wood. Her chest was tight, though she didn't know why. Maybe it was the way Eli had looked at her yesterday, after she finally stood for a brief second with his help. He hadn't clapped, hadn't cheered. He just looked at her like she was something sacred, something rare, that terrified her more than the accident ever had. What if she disappointed him? What if standing once had been a fluke? What if healing was a lie? The door opened behind her, soft and slow. Leo peeked in, his hair a mess of twigs and dirt. Want to see something cool? She raised an eyebrow. Dad says we shouldn't go too far, but there's a trail behind the lake. Secret. There's a tree that grew through a rock. Like through it. It's weird and kind of awesome. She hesitated. Her chair squeaked as she shifted. Come on, he whispered, grinning. You don't have to walk. Just roll. Curiosity beat fear by an inch. 15 minutes later, she was deep in the woods, wheels crunching on damp earth, Leo bouncing beside her like a wild thing. The deeper they went, the more the air changed. The light thinned. The trees closed in. Then they came to the tree. It was exactly as he said, an old pine that had somehow forced itself through a massive stone slab, roots curling around it like arms, defiant. Impossible. See, Leo said proudly. Dad says, nature doesn't ask permission, It just becomes. Ela didn't respond. Her throat ached, because in that moment, she saw herself in the tree, not in its strength, not in its triumph. But in the fight it must have taken to keep growing. Suddenly, a loud snapping sound echoed behind them. Leo froze. She turned. A figure stood at the edge of the path. Marcus. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were narrowed. His voice hard. I asked staff where you were. No one could find you. Do you have any idea how dangerous this is? Leo shrank back instinctively. She's fine. He muttered. We were just, you, Marcus cut in, pointing at the boy. Don't get to decide what's safe. Leo looked at Ela, confused, hurt. She could feel herself retreating, her spine stiffening. The old instinct, hide, silence, vanished. But then she saw the tree again, the impossible pine, and something inside her broke. Stop, she said sharply. Marcus blinked. What? Stop treating me like glass, like one wrong breath will shatter me. His mouth opened, then closed. I'm not yours to manage, she continued. I'm not a file on your desk or a contract to review. I'm your daughter, and I needed you, not your money, not your experts, you. Silence fell like snowfall. Leo stood completely still beside her, wide-eyed. Marcus looked at her, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then he did something Ela never expected. He sat down on the forest floor, right there in his suit. His head dropped into his hands. And for the first time, he cried. Not out of control, not loud, just quiet, wrecked weeping. I didn't know how, he whispered. I didn't know how to be with you when I couldn't fix it. Ela watched him. Then she looked at Leo, and in a slow, careful motion, she reached down and touched the forest floor with her hand. Soil, roots, the earth. Maybe we can figure it out, she said. Marcus lifted his head, eyes red. How? A voice came from behind them. By starting small, Eli said, stepping through the trees. By being present, not powerful. He walked past Marcus, kneeling beside Ela. You ready for today? She nodded. But no walking, she said quickly. No walking, he agreed. Just remembering. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You stood once. That was your tree through rock moment. Now let's water the roots. Back at the retreat, he guided her to the platform near the lake again. But this time, he brought something new. A set of ankle braces. Not to walk. Just to feel weight again. We're not chasing movement, he said. We're chasing memory. She looked nervous. If I fall, I'll be there. He helped her into a standing frame. Not full weight, just enough to make her spine remember gravity. Her legs trembled. She closed her eyes. The wind blew, and her body slowly, painfully remembered. Not what it was to walk, but what it was to stand, to hold her own name inside her bones again. She didn't cry, not this time. She smiled. And beside her, Eli whispered, that's what strength looks like. But none of them saw the letter that arrived that night, slipped under Dr. Hall's door. A legal notice from Moreau Global, ordering a review of Willow Ridge's licensing. Questioning its safety, its legality, its methods. Marcus hadn't sent it, but someone inside his company had. And what started as healing was about to turn into a fight. One Ela couldn't ignore. The rain returned with fury that night, as if the sky itself had overheard the threat and decided to scream back. Wind howled through the mountain passes, rattling the shutters of the cabins at Willow Ridge. Thunder cracked in the distance like a warning shot. And inside the main lodge, Dr. Kira Hall stood frozen beneath a single flickering light, reading the letter again and again as if repetition might change the words. Her hands trembled. The legal seal of Moreau Global was stamped across the top. The message was clear. An official inquiry had been filed to investigate Willow Ridge's operating license. Under suspicion, unauthorized therapeutic methods, unlicensed personnel, emotional manipulation of vulnerable patients. In short, everything Willow Ridge stood for. It wasn't signed by Marcus. But the stain of his empire was all over it. Kira's breath hitched as she lowered the letter. Her throat tightened, not with fear, but with a deeper grief. She'd spent 20 years building this place, stone by stone, therapy by therapy, life by life. And now, one piece of corporate paper threatened to wipe it all away. across the compound. Hila slept, or tried to. Her body ached from the standing frame earlier, muscles screaming in strange new ways, but it wasn't the pain keeping her awake. It was the look on Ellie's face before she left the platform, something soft and proud, yes, but also shadowed, like he was preparing to lose something again. As the storm battered the windows, she sat up, swung her legs out of the bed, and reached for her wheelchair. She needed answers. The main lodge smelled like cedar and rain. She found Kira in her office, surrounded by stacks of patient journals and therapy blueprints, her life's work now laid bare. Vulnerable as a sapling in winter. The older woman didn't speak as Hila entered. She simply handed her the letter. Hila read it once, then again, and by the third time, her fingers were white from gripping the page. Who did this? She whispered. A name I don't recognize, Kira said, but I suspect someone inside Moreau Global. Someone who wants to protect Marcus's image. Perhaps they think you're being misled. A slow burn started in Hila's chest. I'm not some corporate liability, she said. I'm not a name they can fold into an expense report. Her voice rose, surprising even herself. They can't shut this place down. Kira's eyes softened. They can try. The next morning, she wheeled herself through the mud to the greenhouse. Eli was already there, rainwater dripping from his sleeves, trimming back a row of wild basil. He looked up as she approached, sensing something different in the way her wheels bit into the gravel. It's happening, isn't it? He asked quietly. She handed him the letter. He read it in silence, jaw tightening with every line. They're coming for you, she said. They think you're dangerous. He looked up. Maybe I am, at least to people who profit from keeping others broken. Her breath caught. What do we do? He studied her for a long moment. We fight. That afternoon, she called her father. Not through assistants, not through secretaries. She dialed his personal line. Hila, he said, surprised. I was just about to call. Don't, she cut in. Don't lie to me. He paused. What's wrong? A letter, she said. Your company is trying to shut Willow Ridge down. A long silence. Then, I didn't authorize that. But it's your name on the seal, she said. And your silence will be taken as agreement. He didn't respond. She took a breath. If this place goes down because of you, I will never come home again. Do you understand? Finally, his voice cracked. I'm trying to protect you. Then do it, she said. But this time, not with money, not with control. Protect me by letting me grow. Click. Call ended. The next day, the investigation began. A team of evaluators arrived in polished black cars, escorted by two suits from Moreau Legal. They walked the grounds like predators, smiling thinly, clipboards in hand. They took photos of the cabins, the greenhouse, the therapy rooms. They interviewed staff with forced politeness. Everything that made Willow Ridge feel like home was being dissected under fluorescent scrutiny. But they didn't expect Hila when they called her in for a routine patient evaluation. She rolled in with her sketchbook in hand, her jaw set like stone. How has your experience been here? One man asked, typing without looking up. She opened her sketchbook and slid it across the table. Every page was dated, every drawing raw, a visual journal of her descent and resurrection. The cracked piano, the broken mirrors, the little boy with his freckled smile, the man planting lavender in silence, and finally her own figure, not in a wheelchair, but standing in the frame of a mountain sunrise, arms open. This is how I measure healing, she said. You can't shut that down. They didn't reply, but one of them paused longer on the sketch than he should have. Outside, Eli and Kira waited under the rain. Marcus's car pulled up moments later, tires crunching gravel, steam rising from the hood. He stepped out, not in a suit, but in a sweater and jeans. He looked like a man trying to be smaller. I stopped it, he said before anyone could speak. Pulled the complaint, dissolved the team. They'll leave by morning. Kira narrowed her eyes. What changed your mind? He looked past her toward the greenhouse, toward the echo room, toward the woman his daughter was becoming. She did. And for the first time, he didn't speak like a CEO. He spoke like a father. That night, the rain finally stopped. Hila stood in the echo room, hands trembling, staring at her reflection. The braces were on. Eli stood behind her, silent as always. She took one breath, another, and then she stepped forward, one step, to the braces held. Eli didn't catch her. He didn't need to, because this time she walked on her own, and behind her, the ghosts of doubt finally stopped following. The mountain air was razor sharp that morning, cold enough to sting the lungs, but clean enough to make you feel like you could finally breathe. Eli stood at the edge of the lake, her hands trembling slightly at her sides, her braces hidden beneath loose pants, her body still adjusting to the miracle she didn't dare name aloud. Her wheelchair sat empty behind her. She had walked, not far, not gracefully, but she had walked, and the earth had held her. But even as she stared into the lake's glassy surface, something dark coiled just beneath the victory she didn't trust. Peace anymore. Peace had a habit of vanishing just when she reached for it. And today, the stillness of the water felt expectant, like something beneath it was waiting to rise. Behind her, footsteps crunched on frost-laced gravel. She didn't turn. She already knew who it was. "You okay?" Eli asked gently. "Do you ever get scared after the good days?" She murmured. He stepped beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. "Every time." "Why?" "Because healing makes you hope again. And hope is the most dangerous thing there is." She nodded slowly, the lake reflecting the weight in her eyes. "Then why keep doing it? Because not hoping is worse." Later that afternoon, the final evaluation documents arrived by courier, sealed in a white envelope with a stamped insignia from the New York State Board of Therapeutic Health Services. Drive. Hall opened it in the lodge, surrounded by staff and patients. Her hands didn't shake, but her heart did. Inside were two letters, one a formal statement declaring Willow Ridge to be in full compliance, and the second a personal handwritten note from one of the evaluators. "This place saved my sister. She came through your doors a decade ago and left walking. I never forgot that. I pulled your file. I won't let them touch this place. Keep doing what you're doing. The world needs it." Kira folded the letter with tears brimming in her storm-gray eyes. They had one, but peace doesn't come without echoes. That night, as the staff celebrated quietly in the mess hall, as candles flickered and soup simmered, Eli sat alone on the bench outside the greenhouse, watching the stars. He was never one for loud joy. Victory made him quieter. Eli found him there, drawn by the way his stillness always calmed her own chaos. "Why aren't you inside?" she asked, pulling her blanket tighter around her. He smiled faintly. "Watching the sky feels safer than people, sometimes." She sat beside him. They didn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, "You saved me." His brow furrowed. "I didn't do anything magical." "Exactly," she said. "You didn't try to fix me. You didn't push. You just stayed." He looked at her, then really looked, and in his eyes was something fragile, something he hadn't said yet. "There's something you should know," he said slowly. She turned toward him. His voice was steady, but there was something in it that trembled like an old wound reopening. "When Leo's mother died, she left a letter in it. She begged me not to save the world, but to find someone who needed saving. She said I couldn't carry my own grief until I gave someone else a reason not to drown in theirs." Isla's breath caught. "And then you came," he finished, voice hoarse. "And I thought, maybe she meant you." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition. "I don't need saving anymore," she whispered. "I know, but I don't want to go back to who I was before." "Then don't," he said. "Become someone new." The next morning, Dr. Hall stood at the center of the compound and made an announcement. "Willow Ridge will be opening a new wing," she said. "Not for patients, but for mentors. People who've walked the path and are ready to walk others through it." The staff clapped. Patients cheered. But Ela didn't react. Not until Dr. Hall turned directly to her. "And we'd like you to be the first." Silence fell. Every eye turned to her. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the greenhouse. At Eli, at her hands, scarred but steady. And then she stepped forward, not rolled. Stepped. "Yes," she said. The decision spread like fire through the retreat. The girl who hadn't spoken for weeks, now walking, mentoring, leading. The girl who once curled into herself, now stood in the garden with Leo, teaching him to play piano on a keyboard they set up beneath a Willow tree. And as days passed, something else changed. She laughed more, danced slowly between the rows of lavender with her eyes closed, wrote letters to children in hospitals who felt forgotten. And one evening, she handed Eli a sealed envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Read it later," she said. He did. "Alone, under the stars." It said, "You helped me breathe. Now I want to help others hear their own heartbeat. Thank you for staying, for never turning me into a case file, for treating me like a person, not a project. I'm not yours to save, I'm mine to become, but I'll never forget who showed me the path." He folded the letter, and for the first time since his wife's death, Eli let go. Of guilt. Of failure. Of silence. He walked to the edge of the lake and wept. Not from pain. From peace. The first snow fell the day she was meant to leave. Soft and quiet, like a secret whispered from the clouds. It coated the mountaintops in pale silver and laced the trees with icy breath. The lake froze at the edges, delicate and thin, like memory just starting to harden. The sky was the color of steel, and yet everything beneath it felt wrapped in something warm, sacred, inevitable. Ela stood on the porch of her cabin, watching the flakes fall onto her outstretched palm. Her coat was oversized, her breath clouded in front of her face. Behind her, her suitcase waited by the door, closed, packed, final. This was supposed to be the end of the story, but something about it didn't feel like an ending at all. Drive. Hall had offered her a permanent position, mentor in residence, co-developer of the new patient-turned-guide program. Her father had made no objections. In fact, Marcus had been quiet for days, observing, listening, as if he were finally beginning to understand that power wasn't in control, but in presence. He'd even donated anonymously to rebuild the retreat's therapy center and install adaptive music studios. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you," not yet. But the first time she stood in front of him without braces, he dropped his phone mid-conversation, and that silence had said more than any applause ever could. But now she was leaving, for 1 week, only. Drive. Hall insisted it was important, necessary, not to return to the city, but to confront it. "You've grown something new here," she said. "Now go back and see what it's grown over." New York hit her like a cold slap. The sound of horns, the smell of wet asphalt, the chaos of movement, none of it had changed. But she had, and it made all the noise feel louder than before. She stayed in a modest hotel on the edge of Midtown, away from the penthouse she once called home. She didn't visit her old performance halls, not yet. She needed to do one thing first. She returned to the street where the accident happened. The crosswalk was still there. Faded white paint, black tire marks, traffic moved in lazy frustration. A bakery stood where the old corner store had once been, and across from it, a bench. Rusted, old, forgotten. She sat there for hours, watching people pass. And then she pulled out the letter, the one she'd never opened. The one from the man who had hit her. The driver. It had arrived 2 months after the crash, handwritten, trembling with guilt, but she'd never read it. Never wanted to. Until now. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the page. "Dear Miss Moreau, you don't know me, and I pray you never have to. I was the man in the car that night, distracted, thoughtless. I will never forgive myself, every day since. I see your face in the mirror of my mistakes. I don't expect you to accept this letter. I only wanted to say, I wish it had been me." There were no excuses, no explanations. Just grief. And in some strange, twisted way, she felt it. Not pity, not forgiveness. Just understanding. Pain had many forms. Not all of it wore wheelchairs and hospital gowns. Some wore shame, some wore silence. She folded the letter, placed it gently under a stone at the foot of the bench, and then she left it behind, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer owned her. On the final night of her visit, she gave an impromptu recital at a community center near the edge of Harlem. The piano was old, its keys slightly warped, its pedal sluggish, but to her, it sounded more alive than any concert hall she'd ever known. People came, some she knew, many she didn't. Her father arrived and stood quietly in the back. And when she played, there was no precision, no performance. Just feeling, pure and imperfect. Afterward, a teenage girl approached her with wide eyes. "How do you play like that?" she whispered. Ela smiled, Because I stopped trying to be perfect, she said, and started trying to be honest. When she returned to Willow Ridge, the snow was deeper, the lake had frozen solid, and standing at the edge of the path, bundled in a coat to sizes too big, was Leo. "You came back," he grinned. "Told you I would." He took her hand and led her down the path toward the greenhouse, where new seedlings had been planted in rows, and soft light poured through the glass like a second sunrise. Eli was waiting there, as always. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She walked to him, no braces, no chair, and stood so close she could feel his breath warm the winter air. "You stayed," she said. "Always." And then, with trembling fingers, she pulled something from her pocket. A key. Not to a music box. To the echo room. "I want you to have this," she said. He blinked. "Why?" "Because that place doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to whoever needs it next." His eyes stung. "You're not the girl who came here anymore," he whispered. "No," she said, "I'm not." And then she turned to face the field beyond the greenhouse, blanketed in snow, untouched. "Let's build something new," she said, "together." And as the first sunbeam broke over the ridgeline, the girl who had once been shattered by a distracted moment, by silence, by the weight of a body that refused to move, stepped into the snow and left a trail of footprints behind her. Not proof of survival. But of becoming. And the world, at last, felt quiet. Not with absence, but with peace.